you so much. Thanks to the Cuba program of the Institute of Latin American Studies, Dr. Mick in particular, and Ellen Johnson, of course, and to the Finley Vaccine Institute here in Havana, where our Cuban colleagues join us now, including my colleague, Dr. Tania Aguilar, who has helped organize this event. As editor of the journal Medic Review and also an alum of the Columbia School of Journalism, I'm doubly pleased that the university joined in sponsoring this webinar, which is also part of a series sponsored by Medic Review. May has asked me to provide a brief context for this evening's session. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic appears to be waning in some parts of the world, but other parts, countries, regions, communities, and people are not so lucky. And unfortunately, we also know that luck has little to do with how safe you are from the virus, a virus that even if asymptomatic can leave long-lasting systemic damage to your health. 2 years into the pandemic, the main reason we're not all safer from COVID-19 is because, in fact, we are not all in this together, ever more so when it comes to vaccination. Right now, while other important issues plague vaccination efforts in places like the US itself, people in low and middle income countries just don't have access to the vaccines on the world market, a place where patent protection still reigns over public health, and vaccines are far from being a public good. So much so that the latest editorials in The Lancet, the New England Journal of Medicine, and our own journal have zeroed in on vaccine inequity and its dangers for people the world over. We know that only 11% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose. That means that some 3 billion people worldwide have not received even a single dose. The Omicron variant has richer countries stocking up on booster shots, once again delaying supplies for poor countries, the last in line. As we said in our latest editorial, the hard, tragic reality is that many more people will become sick and some will die needlessly. In this context, we come to Cuba, a country with a biotech industry that has developed 5 vaccine candidates, several now approved by its regulatory authority for emergency use, even in children as young as 2 years old. So how have these vaccines been developed, rolled out, and what do we know about the results so far? Do they hold promise beyond Cuban borders to help address vaccine disparities? 3 distinguished Cuban scientists are here to address these questions and more. In order of appearance, they are Dr. Dagmar García, Director of Research here at the Finley Vaccine Institute. She is a pharmacologist by training and 3 times has been awarded the Cuban Academy of Sciences Annual Prize for her research. Dr. Sonia Resik, head of the Pedro Curie Tropical Medicine Institute's Virology Laboratory, coordinator of vaccine clinical trials, and an expert on Cuban vaccination strategies. And finally, Dr. Agustín Lage, advisor to the president of the umbrella BioCuba Pharma Group and former director of the Molecular Immunology Center that developed the therapeutic lung cancer vaccine now in clinical trials in the States. Dr. Lage is a pioneer of Cuban biotech. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Dr. Dagmar García.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity for sharing with you our progress in the development of Cuban vaccines. I will talk about the Cuban experience developing COVID-19 vaccines. I don't know if we have the presentation available. Okay. Okay. We will talk about the Cuban experience for developing COVID-19 vaccines. The next one, please. We will start our conversation with three main topics. Firstly, we will talk about the strategic decision to develop our own vaccines. In second point, the critical stage for developing these vaccines. And at the end, we will talk about some clinical results of Soberana vaccines. The strategy decision to develop our vaccine in Cuba was supported by these main topics. Firstly, we have a biotech industry with more than 30 years of experience in vaccine development. Also, we have the human resource with the knowledge and scientific capacity. We have installed productive capacity for satisfying national demand and also for exportation of the vaccines. Another important point is the integration between the Cuban biotech industry with the Ministry of Public Health that could be able to move faster in the development of this vaccine. And also we know that from the beginning, we know about the potential limitation that we will have from Cuba for access to other 19 COVID vaccines. For this reason, we decided to design our own vaccines based on technological platform that we have available in Cuba. These are the case of sub-unit vaccines. The rest of the world have been working and developing a vaccine from some other platform, like mRNA, adenoviral vector, virus inactivated vaccine, and also sub-unit vaccine. But in Cuba, we have a huge experience on the development of sub-unit vaccine during more than 30 years. The advantage of the sub-unit vaccine are mainly related with the broad use of globally for infection disease prevention, the safety warranties of this kind of vaccines that are vaccines that have been used for many years, even in children. We have installed manufacturing capacity that could be able for producing high amount of doses. We have regulatory experience for moving this vaccine from the research stage to the commercial stage. And also this kind of vaccine permits faster progress toward pediatric age group. Now, of course, we had some important challenge for this decision of develop our vaccines. The first one was the date, the time. We have the day as unit of time. Every day we need a new resource for take a decision in the coming days. Also, new knowledge we have appeared new knowledge in a very short time, not only in Cuba, also in the research on the world. And in this context, we designed 5 vaccines candidates. The other challenge that we should take precise decisions, we should define critical stage, and we should have high priority as country for these 5 projects. And the other important point that we work in alliance between all our institutions, integration, and we found a way for complementary our capacities for having the results in very short period of time. We developed 5 candidate vaccines. 3 of them are called on the umbrella Soberana. These vaccines have been developed by the Finlay Vaccine Institute in a consortium with the Center for Molecular Immunology, the University of Havana, and the National Center of Biopreparados. These vaccines are based on the RBD. All Cuban vaccines are based on the RBD as antigen. In the case of Soberana's vaccine, the RBD is produced on mammalian cells. In the case of Soberana 02, the RBD is conjugated to tetanus toxoid. It's a unique conjugate vaccine that is available on the world for protecting against SARS-CoV-2 virus. Soberana Plus is a dimeric form of the RBD adjuvated in alum, and Soberana 1 is also a dimeric form of RBD in combination with outer membrane protein from the meningococcal B, also adjuvated in alum hydroxide. Soberana 02 and Soberana Plus already has emergency use authorization. The other two vaccines have been developed by the CIGB, the Center for Engineer and Genetic Biotechnology, and also for pharmaceutical laboratory ICA. These vaccines are also RBD vaccines, and in this case, the RBD is produced on the platform of Pichia mastoris production, that is the same platform that has been used for many years for the production of hepatitis B vaccines. Abdala is based on the monomeric RBD in alum, and Mambisa is a proposal of vaccines for nasal use, and is a combination between the monomeric form of the RBD with the antigen of superfice of the hepatitis B. Abdala, in this case, Abdala also has authorization for using in Cuba and some other countries. The critical stage for the development of this vaccine are common for all the vaccines. It has been characterized by the demonstration of the immunogenicity in different animal models, mice, rabbits, rats, monkeys, and hamsters, and all the studies, toxicological studies for demonstrating the safety of the vaccine at preclinical level. Here appear some of the papers that has been published for this vaccine that are available currently. Next one, please. The clinical evaluation also has had important or common stage for all the vaccines. All the vaccines started, of course, with phase 1 and phase 2 in adults between 19 to 80 years old. Later, we performed phase 3 placebo-controlled clinical trial for clinical efficacy, and also in the case of Soberanas and Abdala, moved to phase 1 to clinical trial in children between 3 to 18, sorry, there is a mistake, 18 years old. The case of Soberana vaccine, at the end of all clinical studies, the better combination was a heterologous scheme between combining 2 doses of Soberana 02 with 71% of clinical efficacy, and a first dose with Soberana Plus increased efficacy until 92.4%. Also, Soberana Plus has been developed as a vaccine for booster, even for convalescent people, or for using as universal booster in persons who have received previous vaccination. Here appear the papers that we have published with the clinical results of the vaccine, and 3 preprints that are sharing in Meraki, but I'm waiting for the peer review process. In the case of Abdala, also perform a huge phase 3 clinical trials with 3 doses scheduled with interval of 14 days. And it was demonstrated 91.2% of clinical efficacy. Next. Now I'm going to do a particular explanation of the results that we have with Soberana in pediatric population, because we think that in the case of Soberana is the result that is changing some paradigm in the vaccination against COVID-19 on the world. We start, as I said before, Soberana 02 is a conjugate vaccine. Conjugate vaccines are a kind of vaccine that originally appear for solving immunological problems or low immunogenicity of some kind of antigens. And we designed Soberana 02 thinking that at the end of the line, we will move to a pediatric population. We start in June of last year, we start a clinical trial, phase 1, phase 2, in 350 children and teenagers between 3 to 18 years old here in Havana. The main results of this trial, in terms of safety, we demonstrate that the schedule of 3 doses was very safe in children. More than around 53% of the children report at least one adverse event. Any serious or severe adverse event was reported during the trial. More than 93% of the adverse events were classified as mild, and more than 80% of the adverse events were local, and the local pain was the most frequent adverse event related with the vaccination. In terms of immunogenicity, next, we perform an immunobridging between, for comparison, the immune response in children compared with young adults. What happened with the case of the evaluation of these COVID-19 vaccines in children? Some vaccines have performed clinical trial phase 3 control with placebo. But this is very critical in terms of ethical, because it's difficult to enroll children in clinical trials for receiving placebo formulation. Then, following some recommendation of the FDA, we perform a clinical trial, and we have as objective to compare the immune response in young adults, a population where we demonstrate clinical efficacy, and we compare with the immune results in children. And what we found is that the immune response after 2 doses of Soberana 2 is higher compared with the immune response of 2 doses in young adults in terms of the amount, the concentration of the antibodies. In terms of viral neutralization, the results between children and adults are similar, and we found a non-inferiority response between children and adults. And we, with these results, we move faster for the asking for the emergency use in our national regulatory agency. Next one. Here I'm showing the results of conventional live virus neutralization against different variants of the virus. As we see, we evaluate a subset of samples, and we found neutralization titer versus the variant alpha, delta, and beta. And we found the same results that have been reported for other vaccines, that there is a reduction of the neutralization activity of the serum versus delta variant, and the higher reduction is reported versus beta variant. But still 100% of the children that we evaluated have a neutralizing activity. In terms of T-cell response, we found that even the children and the teenagers have the vaccination stimulate the specific T-cell response with the production of cells expressing interferon gamma and IL-4 cytokines. With these results, at the beginning of September, we get from the national regulatory agency in Cuba, we got the emergency use for the vaccination of Cuban children with the schedule of Soberana. Between September and November, it was the main campaign. We applied more than 5 million doses of Soberana in full population between 2 years to 18 years old. We got more than 96% of coverage of the Cuban children population. Also, we vaccinated more than 1 million children in Nicaragua. Next. The pediatric national vaccination campaign was a success. Only 349 adverse events were reported in 233 children. The frequency of adverse event was only 0.01%, and the rate of adverse event was very low, as is shown in the slide. And the most important fact that we have an impact of the pediatric mass vaccination campaign in Cuba is this slide. Here we resume the weekly incidence of cases during the Delta wave in Cuba compared with the Omicron wave. During Delta wave, we don't have most of our population vaccinated. It was the Delta wave was in the middle of the vaccination of our adult population. But we felt the Omicron wave with all our children vaccinated, more than 90% of our children vaccinated, and more than 85% of our adult population vaccinated. And then what we saw is that there was an important reduction of the cases during the Omicron wave compared with the Delta wave. And this particular case was a little bit different than the rest of the world observed with the Omicron wave, where the children were not vaccinated. I think this is okay, because we removed the last slide because it's important to take about that in the other presentation. Thank you for your time, and I will be here for questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Sonia Resik, who is Director of the Virology Laboratory at the Pedro Curie Tropical Medicine Institute here in Havana.
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank Oh, okay. Sorry. I want to thank the University of Columbia and also the Medical Review Journal to invite me to participate in this webinar. I want to talk about the result of the Cuban, could you, the first one, please? Okay. I want to talk about the results of Cuban COVID-19 vaccination program. The next one. But I want to show you some characteristics about our Cuban National Immunization Program. This program was developed in the early 16th. And since that time, the government covered about 98% of the National Immunization Program expenses, and the remaining 2% is covered by funds from international organizations as FAO, UNICEF, or Gavi. This program is integrated into primary healthcare service with an active community participation. And everybody has equal opportunity and access to the program, and is free of charge for everybody in the country. Systematically, the program use a very sensitive epidemiological surveillance system to know about the immunogenicity of all our vaccines in Cuba. And also, we introduce an active surveillance for adverse events following immunization for each vaccine we immunize. It's important to know that the vaccination in Cuba is totally volunteer. The next one. The Cuban immunization program, of course, have had a great impact on the incidence of vaccine preventable diseases. As you can see in the slide, the first line, some illness such as poliomyelitis have been eradicated, and others such as meningitis, meningitis due to Haemophilus or hepatitis B in people younger than 20 years, or BC meningococcal meningitis or typhoid fever has now a very low incidence in the country. The next one, please. As Dr. Dagmar said before, we have a good development of science fundamentally in the last 16 years. And Cuban biotechnology began to develop in the early 80s. And today, the country has a company called Biotech Pharma in Spanish, that is in charge of research and development and production of many vaccines that we use in our immunization program. As you can see in the next slide, please. These are the vaccines produced by Cuba, and you can notice also that there are two vaccines that has been pre-qualified by World Health Organization, the vaccine against hepatitis B and the Haemophilus influenzae type B vaccine. The next one, please. Of course, as Dr. Dagmar said, our vaccine have been international prestigious. We have sent more than 100 million of doses of vaccine to around 40 nations in the world. And also, there is a big experience accumulated in the last 30 years producing vaccines, and they are safe and effective. And also, all of those items permit us to produce vaccine candidates, to develop vaccine candidates in Cuba against COVID-19. We have, as Dr. Dagmar said, we had five vaccine candidates, and after the clinical trials, 3 of them now are approved for our regulatory agency. There are Soberana, 3 Soberana, and 1 Abdala. The next one, please. Okay, the Cuban vaccination strategy against COVID is part of an extensive tradition of our national health system and has been characterized by being intensive, extensive, and carried out in a short time. I want to show you here the timeline for COVID vaccination strategy in adult population. As you can see, in March 2021, we finished clinical trials phase 3, and at that same time, we start the intervention study in risk population. Everything approved by our regulatory agency. After that, we introduced another intervention in risk group of and territories. It was approved for our Minister of Public Health based on our constitution. And early as July 2021, the SECMEC authorized the emergency use of Abdala vaccine candidate, and we started the mass vaccination in the country. In August, Soberana 02 and Soberana Plus was approved also as to use as emergency, and we started also to vaccinate people with Soberana. And in September, we started to vaccinate convalescent people, and in November 15, we started to give a booster dose to all people who received a full vaccination scheme before, during the mass vaccination campaign. I think that everything was occurred due to different keys of or different different pillars we have in our country. One of them is that we have a biopharmaceutical company that manufacture, as you saw, a lot of our vaccines. We have scientists and technologists with a very high experience, and also there was a very good interaction between the manufacturers and the health system to produce vaccines at the same time that the health system needed to continue the vaccination in each of the steps that we show in this slide. The next one, please. The same occurred with the vaccination strategy in children and teens. As Dagmar said, the emergency use authorization for Soberana 02 was approval in September 2021. And after that, Abdala vaccine was approved to use in young teens aged 12 to 18. In October, also, segment approval the emergency use of Abdala for children aged between 2 and 11. And in October, Soberana Plus vaccine was approval to use in young teens older than 2. And of course, it was also approved a Soberana Plus vaccine to use in pediatric population that were convalescent of the illness. The next one, please. Here we compare the percent of vaccination of Cuba that Cuba showed and the lower middle income countries in where we are as country. And until last February 27, this slide is from 21, I think. But the last number we could get was from February 27. More than 9 million of people have a complete vaccination schedule, with which represent 89.2% of the Cuban population. And as you see, there was 87, now it's 89.2. And there are a little percent, 6.4, that are that now have a partial vaccinated. Also, more than 34,900 million of doses has been administered with the Cuban Soberana 02, Soberana Plus, or Abdala vaccines. As you can see, is higher than the rest of the world, and even higher than the percent of people that are vaccinated in the lower and middle income countries. The next one, please. Here is a curve that shows the same. And as you see there, Cuba started the vaccination later than the world, but the percent of people vaccinated is higher than the world has now. The next one, please. I don't want to talk too much about this because Dagmar showed these numbers, but it's important to know that also we vaccinate pregnant and breastfeeding women. That is important also because this decision had a big implication in the immunity of the newborns in Cuba. And I think that we didn't do a vaccination in babies lower than 2 years old, but if you vaccinate pregnant women and breastfeeding women, you are increasing the immunity in these newborns that we have now. Okay, the next one. But not everything is good. We have, as you can see in this slide, we have more than 700 people, 700,000 people who have not received any vaccine until February 21st. But this group it's important to say that this group include all babies under 2 years old, and also people with any pathology that limits the vaccination. And also we have a little amount of people that not want to be vaccinated with our vaccines. The next one. We started the booster very early, and we pushed at this time, we pushed more than 5,000 Cuban people. And also, as you can see in the slide, the booster vaccination has also been carried out in a short period of time in Cuba. At this moment, we have more than 50% of people that receive a booster dose of both vaccines. The next one, please. For my point of view, and this is my point of view, Cuba, the milestone of vaccination in Cuba are many. One of them is the integration of Cuba's scientific community, Ministry of Public Health, and vaccine producers for a successful control of the pandemic. There was a fast-track regulatory approval mechanism in the country that permit to overlap step by step very fast. And there were 5 vaccine candidates produced, and three of them has been authorized as vaccines. I want to notice that one of them was the first vaccine approval in America, in the Latin American countries. And the preclinical and clinical studies were conducted in a record time. The process was organized by the state from trial phases to mass vaccination and booster. Some, as I said, some steps were overlapping each other. The process was national, intensive, massive, and short, and was done in a short term, in short time, and was conducted. All the process was conducted at the primary healthcare level. That it was important because here we have a family doctor for around 1,000 of people, and we could had the possibility to vaccinate everybody. And also because we have 3 vaccines now and 2 more candidates, we have the possibility to use homologous and heterologous schemes. That we know now that heterologous schemes are getting better results than homologous schemes around the world. And the vaccination covered all children, teens aged to 2 to 18 years, and adults over 18 years of age, and convalescent, and also, as I said, pregnant women and breastfeeding women. The next one. And in Spanish, we have a phrase that Gail liked very much, and Gail say that this slide is the chicken of the rice and chicken, no, and but the breast of the chicken. Yeah. That is the most, the better part of the chicken. And because I want to show you the effect of mass vaccination and booster on COVID-19 incidence in Cuba. I think that this is the best way to say that our vaccines are working very well. Yeah, and the little one graph is the daily new confirmed COVID-19 death per million people And the big one is the incidence. But if you see, the shape of weights are the same. The only thing is that the last peak death is lower than the peak of incidence. But we detected the first 3 cases in Cuba March 11, 2020. And we started the vaccination, the mass vaccination, May 12, 21. And it was, the process started before, but very close to the Delta wave started, and the peak of Delta wave, as you saw there. But when the 60% of people were vaccinated, fully vaccinated, the peak of Delta wave started to going down very fast, as you saw there. And November 15, we started the booster vaccination, and we had the less number of cases during November, December 2021. Then when the 50% of people got the booster and more than 80% of people were fully vaccinated, the Omicron wave started in Cuba. But as you saw, the peak was third part of the Delta peak, Delta wave peak, and the death peak that is in the little graph is more short,
Very low.
lower than the other one. And because of that, we could say as conclusion that the quality of Cuban vaccines and the immunization strategy has been key factors in the result that we have now. And we could say that we have a very big control of the pandemic here in Cuba. And it's another thing that was important is the vaccination of almost all the pediatric population here in Cuba. We rest to vaccinate people from pediatric people with an age lower than 2, but their mothers were vaccinated too. Because of that, we think that the immunity across our population is now very high. Ready for questions. But don't do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sonia Resik. It may be interesting for people to know, many of you already know, Cuba has a population of about 11.2 million people. And I was looking at today's statistics. Today, there were 396 new cases of COVID. There was 1 death. And to give you an idea of how that all got distributed, there were 6 new cases here in Havana and no deaths. So you get a sense of how far down both the incidence and the case fatalities have gone. And I think that is a very, we've been watching it very closely, and it's been going down for several months now. Finally, I'd like to ask Dr. Agustín Lage, who is advisor to the president of Pharma, the umbrella group for Cuban biotech, to offer us some reflections.
Well, what to say now after the data provided by Sonia and Dagmar, let me just use that time to highlight some ideas that I would like very much to we kept in mind. The first idea is that what is happening here in the field of vaccination and also treatment, I am going to talk about treatment afterwards, is the consequence of the previous existence of the Cuban biotechnology industry. So this cannot be done if you start biotechnology at the same time of the pandemics. So when the pandemic came, so there were 30 years of evolution of biotechnology industry and biotechnology research down here. And we should pay attention to how early was the bet of on biotechnology in Cuba. The very first biotechnology company that existed ever in the world is Genentech in California, and this was inaugurated in 1976. And the very first biotechnology, what you can say company, no, research and manufacturing organization for biotech here in Cuba, at that time devoted to interferon, was inaugurated in 81. So only 5 years after the initiation of biotechnology industry in the US. The majority of the major biotechnology companies in North America were in the 80s, no? Started in the 80s. And our Center of Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology was inaugurated in 86. So this is the first time, and very interesting case is antibodies, because one of the institutions of Cuban biotechnology is the Center of Molecular Immunology, was created for monoclonal antibodies. And this one was inaugurated in 1994. And at the time, they were for antibodies for cancer treatment, no? And at that time, there was not one single monoclonal antibody registered in the world for the treatment of cancer. The very first was registered in the US in 1997. So, which means that the origin of biotechnology in Cuba was a very early, and this explains why when we got the shock of the pandemics, there was in place not only the people with the experience, but the organizations, the manufacturing capacity. No, take for example that one of the vaccine that Dagmar explained to you, so the Soberana vaccine, the antigen must be produced in mammalian cell fermentation, and mammalian cell fermentation we started here in 1994. Not for the COVID, no, but for the monoclonal antibodies. But at the time we needed to scale up the manufacturing of the vaccine, well, we have the fermenters, we have facilities. These facilities have also had inspection of regulatory authorities, even European regulatory authorities, and we were in the position of make a kind of reprofiling of all the development that we had here. So the vaccine is the, let's say, the most known result, the most known success. But I would like also to use my time to point to the treatment, because Cuban biotechnology also put on the table not only vaccine, but also monoclonal antibodies and peptides for the treatment of hyperinflammation of the severe COVID. And take, for example, there are 3 major products: monoclonal antibody against T lymphocytes, another monoclonal antibody against EGF receptor, which is part of the cascade of the endothelial damage of the COVID, and a peptide that is a fragment of picture protein. So these 3 products had previous registration in Cuba. So these are original products, Cuban patents, but they have been registered for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune diseases. And then what happened in the COVID is we took the very same product and used it for the treatment of severe COVID. So, and these were products that also had at the time already manufacturing process at some scale. So the very first idea is that what happened with biotechnology in COVID, no, is a consequence of having started biotechnology in the early 80s. So that's the first idea. There is also a second idea that is not commented too much, even in our narrative. and it's this simultaneous development in Cuba in the 80s of the biotechnology industry and the primary care system. These were two, let's say, two big projects of development in Cuba, and now you have a simultaneous development of the biotech industry and the primary care. And this is not very common elsewhere. So you can have countries with big facilities and state-of-the-art machinery and high technology, but low coverage. And the other way around, there are other countries that have made an effort of achieving public health coverage, but with low technology for low medical technology. So having at the same time sophisticated product and primary care, I think this is one of the keys of the success of the facing the COVID, because the vaccine is not everything. No, you need the vaccine, but you need the access of the people.
And the
You need
vaccinators.
medical doctor in the mountains that can.
The vaccinators.
And you need the vaccination, and you need the educational level of people that produce the acceptance and the willingness to participate. So all these are the components. It's not what it is in the flask. So of course you need what is in the flask, but in the whole society that carry out the program. This is another aspect that is worth to be highlighted in this conversation. So another one. So okay, well, let's focus on what we think we have learned from COVID, because now that COVID is passing, for less the peak, so we will remain with some endemic incidents as expected to happen, no? But the COVID is leaving here at least 5 points of experience that we need to project for the post-COVID time. So the first is the importance of the aging of the population. So right now in Cuba, we are approaching to 30% of the population above 60 years old. So the demographic pyramid in Cuba is becoming narrow in the base and wide in the top. This is a consequence of an increase in life expectancy. This is also a consequence of the decrease in natality, which is in turn a consequence of the education of women. And one of the regularity of public health everywhere in the world is that wherever you increase the education level of the women, natality goes down. So, and it's what to be expected here. So, and we are approaching this challenging situation of having 30% of the population above 60 years. And COVID is also highlighting the importance of aging. And if you see the distribution of mortality of COVID is completely different to the distribution of mortality of the Spanish influenza of 1918. In the Spanish flu, so you have a high mortality in the infants, in the children, then down in the adult, and then up again in the elderly. But in COVID, you don't have the branch of the children. So almost all the mortality is concentrated in the elderly, no, in the adult. So in the third age.
The seniors.
And then this also points out to a concept that we need to change in public health. That is, the aging of the population brings not only chronic non-communicable diseases, but a novel risk of infectious diseases. And if you listen to the speech of the epidemiologists worldwide, let's say 20 years ago, so they talk about the era of non-communicable diseases. So infectious disease is something from the past. Now we are moving to the time of cancer, atherosclerosis, autoimmunity, so chronic disease. But COVID is teaching that it's not like that. It's not like that, and there is no, in fact, there is no such a thing as an epidemiological transition. What we have is an epidemiological mosaic that is a different concept. And this is a learning from COVID. The other learning from COVID, the other lesson that COVID are teaching us is the importance of chronic inflammation, of chronic subclinic inflammation. Now, nowadays, immunologists agree that aging is nothing more than chronic subclinic inflammation. And they have coined the term of inflammation to denote, to describe the situation in which the inflammatory capacity of the immune system becomes not a protection but a liability. And we knew from well, let's say a couple of decades now that the very same genes that provide protection to infectious disease in the juvenile ages, these very same genes are deleterious in the post-reproductive aging of the humans. And this is called by the immunologists the genome-environment mismatch. So we have a genome that has been selected by evolution in 1,000 years for protecting us from infectious diseases. At the time, there were few people in the planet, and people didn't move that much. And now we are moving this genome to a situation in which we have like billion of people that change from one corner to the other of the planet in hours, no? And with a tremendous urbanization, so people live together, and this is a fertile soil for the outbreaks. If you add environmental problems and the damage of the environment, then that produce that you get close animal species that usually are not that close. So it's a perfect storm. Huh? It's a perfect storm, and then public health should be prepared for this time. No, see, COVID will pass away, but the aging of the population and the environmental damage, no, remains. And this is another lesson from COVID. So the third lesson is that the primary care setting should not be seen just as a space for diagnosis and prevention. It's also a therapeutic space. So we need to move therapeutic, no, to the primary care more and more. And this is a lesson that we learned several years ago here in Cuba by the cancer project, from the cancer program, that as cancer become a chronic disease and people even with advanced tumors can live 10 years, no, then you should move treatment to the home, to the primary care setting, and we should prepare the primary care setting to handle complex medical interventions. And this is another lesson from COVID. Let's say number 4. Well, number 4, I already mentioned it, no? Is the simultaneous development of primary care and biotechnology is an asset. And, but it's not just to say that it is an asset. We must learn how to use that asset and how to make research, no, even moving research also to the primary care setting, and profit from that asset. And finally, and this has not been mentioned in our previous meeting. The last lesson that I put here is the importance of the capacity of the system for handling data and in real time, massive handle of data. And people that study science and biology in other fields are telling us that the major change in biological science in the 21st century is the convergence between biological science and information science. And the importance of the connection between biology and informatics and information science. That is more than informatics. Informatics is the computer and the internet. I'm not talking about that. I am talking of the capacity to collect and interpret enormous amount of data in real time. And this is becoming as important as the intensive care units and the computed tomography and the drugs. So this capacity of handling information, and we have seen that through the COVID pandemic. So this this group of the Ministry of Health, so fighted to be able to make decisions in real time based on data. And we needed to implement that capacity very, very fast. Let me end with some comments about international cooperation, because we are talking here with universities in another country. And if we are sitting around this table, is to end the conversation talking about cooperation. So no, this is a field very fertile for international cooperation. Specifically, what international cooperation is important in every field of science, in every, so whatever, computers, nuclear physics, I don't know, whatever. But especially in the field of immunology and infectious diseases. So that is a situation of the population. The target of an epidemic is the population. So you need to do population medicine. And population medicine have traits, characteristics that are not the same in every country. And there is a lot to learn from each other. And there are phenomena that maybe can be seen in Cuba that cannot be seen in the US and vice versa. No? Phenomena that are different in the US than here. And then we need to set up a strategy of cooperation in the new public health situation that comes from COVID after the COVID. No? This is the idea. And then we should also go beyond the classic international cooperation philosophy. The classic international cooperation philosophy is competitive projects. So somebody put money on the table and saying, well, I will have here, let's say $2 million for malaria or for whatever. And then you have 100 competitive projects, and then you select the 10 or 12 that are more valuable according to the intrinsic value, without regarding too much to the extrinsic value of the project. And you end in your hand with a handful of projects, each one with very little money, and each one completely different and decoupled from the other. So this is the model of international cooperation that came from the 20th century. So we need to move beyond that and to set up another model of international cooperation, more strategic, more related to population research, more transdisciplinary, including many actors. One of the tragedy of the COVID research, and sure you will agree with me in that, is that you have a speech talking in the universities and in the hospital. You have another one in the companies, and it seems like two different languages, and it's very difficult to develop a research project that that put together actors from the public health sector, from the academic sector, and from the enterprise sector. And this is precisely what we need to do. This is precisely what we need to do. So then, COVID, this is my final maybe idea to study the discussion, is that COVID is not only a challenge to immunology or to epidemiology, is also a challenge to the science of international cooperation. I end here, and then let's listen to what our friends would like to discuss.
Thank you very much. And I will turn it back over to Dr. Meg Crahan then in New York.
Thank you, Gail. And thanks to our speakers, Dagmar, Sonia, and Agustín. There are a number of questions, and I'm going to put some together that are duplications, etc. But let's begin with a couple questions posed by Yanis Silgakis. And amongst his questions are, how many deaths have you had amongst the fully vaccinated? And how many deaths have there been among those that are completely unvaccinated, but and those unvaccinated that have natural immunity? And those who were vaccinated after having naturally recovered from COVID. So those are very specific questions to the panelists. And obviously anyone can answer.
But this is
Dagmar, Sonia? Are they still connected? Pardon?
There is a
Get the whole table.
a result of our efficacy trials in where we demonstrated that 100% of efficacy against death and fatal case and severe diseases. We know that in population is not the same because, of course, a clinical trial have done in a very good condition and controlled trial, but we also can say that after vaccination, we show in my last slide that the number of deaths in the country decreased very much after the campaign, the mass campaign vaccination and the booster campaign. I don't have the total amount of people that were vaccinated and death and not vaccinated and death, but in a total, it was a big decrease of cases, fatal cases after vaccination.
Yes,
I don't know if you want to see my last slide to see the graph in where you can see the numbers, the average number of deaths during the last 2 months in Cuba.
Right. No, that's okay. Dagmar, Agustín, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I want to add that there are 2 studies of effectiveness, one with Abdala vaccine here in Havana, and also with Soberana in health worker vaccinated with Soberana. And both studies showed more than 90% of effective protection against death and severe disease. That's our control condition because are still on the studies, but the other thing is that now when we have more than 80% 85% of population fully vaccinated, the probability that the person who died is vaccinated is very high because most of the people are vaccinated. This is a fact. If you have everything vaccinated, probably the person who died because it's older person or with several comorbidities, the person probably is vaccinated. Another important date is regarding children. Yeah, Cuba has suffered 18 deaths in children or in pediatric population during the pandemic, 18 cases. All of them were before vaccinating the children. After vaccinated children and during the Omicron wave, we don't have any case of death in Cuban children. That is important date about the effectiveness of the vaccines against death. I think that are important data about your question.
Okay. Augustine, do you want to add anything?
No, yes, it is. I take for granted what is it.
Okay. The questioner asked where could he go to get these statistics on deaths of vaccinated and unvaccinated in Cuba. Should he go to Medic Review, Gail?
We should encourage the Cuban authors to keep sending their manuscripts to Medic Review, but also I should say that a number of the scientists and a number of the institutions are already publishing in journals such as Vaccine, such as the Lancet, America's Region, the American Chemical Society. There's a number of publications that are already out there, and there are some that are in the pipeline in peer review now. So I would say be a little bit patient. You know, I am also always struck by, you know, how the Cuban scientists managed to do so many things at once in the middle of a pandemic. Yeah. And there are only 24 hours in the day, but they do have a publication strategy, and these papers are rolling out bit by bit in some major journals. So watch for them in Medic Review, but also elsewhere.
Thank you, Gail. There's another question from the same questionnaire, and then we'll move on to other questionnaires. Is there a long COVID syndrome in Cuba? Is it amongst the vaccinated as well as the unvaccinated? Also, have pericarditis and myocarditis, excuse my pronunciation, and other negative side effects been observed in Cuba as well from the COVID vaccine, as they have been observed in the US?
Eventos adversos. No. Okay, the advertisement we get here are very low. We don't have too much severe adverse events. Too much severe adverse events. Some reaction against some vaccine products, as thimerosal, for example. Yes. But the most important adverse event we have seen are local adverse events. Redness, induration, pain, little pain, low fever, but that's it.
And it should be said that Cuban vaccines are protein subunit vaccines.
Yes.
On the contrary, the outside American vaccines are nucleic acid vaccines. So even theoretically, biochemically, you can expect a different profile of toxicities. Moreover, it's not only the fact that there are protein vaccines, is that these vaccines are done or are, let's say, constructed on platforms that are very safe, because the platform of the Soberana vaccine is the very same that we use it for Haemophilus influenza vaccine.
Yeah.
And the very same, we just the antigens the antigen is not the influenza carbohydrate, it's the
It's the protein.
is the protein, but the backbone is the very same. And this vaccine has been used for decades, no, in 10,000 of children only.
No, and Abdallah is using the same platform that hepatitis B.
And Abdallah is
And
using-
hepatitis B vaccine is used in Cuba for more than 30 years.
and in 100% of the newborns,
Of course.
100%. Hepatitis B is a vaccine of the skin, 100% of the
No,
newborns.
newborns are vaccinated the first day of life.
And then if you take, for example, the incidence of hepatitis B in children below 5 years old, is zero. It's approaching to zero.
I show them the incidence of hepatitis B in people less than 20 years, and it's almost nothing.
Someone knows it. And this is the very same platform that is used for Abdallah vaccine. So it's a long, let's say, confidence. You cannot be 100% confident. No, never. But let's say a substantial confidence in its safety.
But as Dagmar said, only 329 adverse events in all children that we vaccinated here in Cuba.
Also important date is about, there is a special attention regarding myocarditis and pericarditis in children, because it's an adverse event that has appeared with RNA vaccines, mainly in teenagers. And we didn't find any case of myocarditis or pericarditis in 1.8 million of children vaccinated in Cuba. That is important issue that is talking about the safety of the vaccines.
And also it's important to notice that Cuban vaccine have been used in other countries as Vietnam, Syria, Nicaragua, Iran, and they didn't report any severe adverse events with our vaccines.
Now concerning the long COVID, because
Yes, because there was some question of long
Yeah.
COVID.
there was a question on that. Then we have a problem of definition. And we are studying that, but we lack, so when I say we, I see science in the world, a shared opinion of what should be the operational definition of long
COVID.
and of the sequela. So it's a research going on. For the time being and provisionally, so we are calculating that roughly in 10% of all the people that had COVID, once you need some kind of medical intervention for what happened after COVID. But this is a very preliminary estimation that depends upon your definition, because if you define this very narrowly, then you have few cases. If you define it broadly, then you have a lot. And I think that in general in the world, it will take time for people to agree what is sequela or post-COVID. Of course, there are cases very clear, no? Pulmonary fibrosis and so on. But there is let's say, a gradient, no? Between having a clear sequela of COVID and having almost nothing. And when you put the line, no, in this, well, it's a matter of debate. For the time being, I can also say that there is a clinical trial ongoing here for managing the pulmonary fibrosis using the EGF vaccine. So the EGF vaccine is the very same vaccine. Now the EGF vaccine is the very same vaccine that we developed for lung cancer. Is the basis of our agreement with Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo. Is the vaccine that is also in clinical trial in the US for advanced lung cancer. What vaccine does is kind of sequestration of EGF in circulation. So you can expect that it could be useful for tackling the pulmonary fibrosis. it will be efficient or not, I don't know. So nobody knows. This is a clinical trial that is starting, but the message is that with the very same product we also have from biotechnology for other applications, we are starting to run clinical trials in the post-COVID season.
Thank you. There are quite a few questions, so I'm going to move along to Diane Stradling, who wants to know, where were the vaccines administered? At the family doctor's office, community centers, at home, at school, or everywhere?
Okay.
Okay.
The massive campaign here in Cuba was done at the primary care family doctor office. And for children and teenagers, we use the schools. We vaccinate children and teenagers at the schools. But the main focus was on family doctor office. Yeah.
Vaccination in the school is very useful here.
Yeah.
Because everyone you talk about vaccinated at the school, you are talking in a children population that is above 98% in the school.
Yeah.
So
yes.
when you have a primary scholarization above 98%, so the school is a useful setting for vaccinating.
Yeah.
If you don't have this rate of scholarization.
But in Cuba, for example, the first vaccines that babies receive during the first year, the vaccination is done in the primary healthcare system.
Yes, because these children are not in the school.
Yes, and all the boosters that are when children are higher than 5 years old are doing at the school system.
The lesson is that you have a link.
Yeah.
A link between the public health coverage and education coverage.
Yeah.
So fertilize each other.
Thank you. A question from Robert Swartz. Can you comment on the WHO authorization process? I understand that there were issues that needed to be addressed. Is there a rough timetable for when the Cuban vaccines might receive approval from the WHO?
Well, it's our intention to obtain the pre-qualification of our vaccine from WHO. At this moment, Abdallah has already submitted the dossier to WHO pre-qualification system, and probably Soberana will submit in the coming weeks. This is a very long and complex process that we have been experienced in Cuba with at least 2 other vaccines that have been previously pre-qualified by WHO. It was a case of hepatitis B vaccine and Haemophilus influenzae type B vaccines. That means that Cuban Biotech has the experience for the process of WHO pre-qualification. For the moment, all the Cuban vaccine have the certificate of good manufacturing process for our national regulatory agency, and the Cuban National Regulatory Agency is recognized by WHO. That means that our vaccines are recognized by a national regulatory agency that is recognized by WHO. But anyway, we start this process. We are submitting or preparing all the dossier for submitting the process for all our vaccines. But in any case, probably at the end of the year, we could have probably the pre-qualification of one of our vaccines. It's our intention, if our wish line, but we know that it's very complex process because there is infection on site, and we need to submit all the dossier with all clinical development. It's complex, but we know how to do it, and we are now preparing for receiving the inspection here in our factories.
In South America, I have 4 regulatory authorities that are recognized by WHO. It's Brazil,
Mhm.
Mexico, Argentina,
and Cuba.
So which means that they change inspectors and procedures of inspection. And the story of the experience of biotechnology for other products like antibodies or erythropoietin or whatever entails also an experience in managing GMP,
Yeah.
manufacturing practice.
Practices.
And this is, by the way, the facility in which we manufacture the spike protein for Soberana is the very same facility that has been inspected previously for human recombinant erythropoietin and for monoclonal antibodies.
And the facility for Abdala is the same facility in where hepatitis B vaccine is manufacturing. And this vaccine was pre-qualified previously by WHO.
I am not telling that it will be easy, eh?
No, it's not easy. It's not easy, but
It's a painful process.
we know the process.
But it's not the first time we pass through.
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question from Natalia Delgado. What are the plans to make your vaccines participate or not in COVAX distribution? Are you planning to produce and distribute yourselves, and if so, where?
Well, we are distributing our
Yeah.
vaccine by ourselves from probably the last 6 months or more. The problem of COVAX is that it's mandatory for COVAX that the vaccine are WHO pre-qualified. That is a contradiction, but we cannot be included in COVAX because our vaccine are not WHO pre-qualified. But in any case, those countries where our national regulatory agency and our emergency use are recognized, we are selling the vaccine, and we have vaccinated millions of persons in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, in Mexico. No, not in Mexico.
But they approved
They approved, but there are not people vaccinated. Vietnam, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and some other countries where we are selling vaccines, and they are used even in children. For example, Nicaragua has used both Cuban vaccines for vaccinated children. Because Soberana and Abdala vaccines are authorized for children between 2 to 5 years old. And no, it's not the rule for other vaccines on the world. Some other vaccines are authorized over 5 years, but not in 2 to 5 years old. And the experience of our massive pediatric campaign is unique on the world. That means that Cuba is the only country on the world with all pediatric population vaccinated. Now, this is important, and I think that every day we receive a new request of vaccine for other countries. Of course, the recommendation of WHO pre-qualified is important also for selling our vaccine in some other countries.
Thank you. There's another question from Natalia Delgado. Do you have plans to produce via joint venture partners your vaccines in other parts of the world for distribution in those areas?
Well,
Yes.
so this is the strategy of the company. Each company, so Pharma is 32 companies. So because people tend to say when they want to take Pharma as a single building, but in fact, this gives me the opportunity to highlight that Pharma is an organization, let me precise with the data, no? Pharma is an organization of 20,000 employees, 32 enterprises, 80 manufacturing facilities. So it's like a holding organization. It's not just one company. And believe it or not, each of these companies has a lot of operational autonomy. And I work in the Center of Molecular Immunology. I cannot say what the strategy of Finland Institute is. It's on them to do that. So it could be that that in some of these enterprises are more aggressive in externalizing manufacturing, and others are more conservative. This can happen, no? In the center where I work, the CIM, the Center of Molecular Immunology, for example, our monoclonal antibody for the treatment of cancer is being manufactured in a joint venture company in Beijing, in China, no? And we have a group of Cuban experts there working with the Chinese, well, they built the facility and they launched the manufacturing in China. We also built a facility again for monoclonal antibody in India, and this facility in India, in Bangalore, is manufacturing itolizumab, that is one of the monoclonal antibodies that we have provided for severe COVID. So the answer is yes. No, there is a will of externalized manufacturing, especially when we have our own joint venture companies abroad. No, and this can happen in the US. So we have now a Cuba-US joint venture company, the very first that exists. And but for the time being, the company is operating in Cuba, but in principle, well, it could be also operating there. This is for cancer. This is for cancer. So Finland Institute will take the decision according to the company policy, if doing that or not. That is on you. So what do you?
Yeah, in our case, we signed a contract with the Institute Pasteur in Tehran, in Iran, and we are transferring the technology for producing Soberana O2 and also Soberana Plus there. They have producing several batches. And this is important because the work that they are doing has complemented the data of our vaccines. For example, we performed a clinical trial here in Cuba, and also they performed a phase 3 clinical trial in Iran. That means that this is important for the dossier of the product, because in our case now for the WHO pre-qualification process, we have a phase 3 performed by external service. That this is important. In the case of our phase 3, for example, here we did when the Beta variant was the predominant in Havana, and they performed the clinical trial in Iran when Delta variant was the predominant, and the results are very interesting. And now they are finally in the reception of the technology, and they call the vaccine with other name. Is the right? They call the vaccine with other name because now it's the vaccine that we transfer to them in some contract or agreement between us. And it's not the isolated example. There are other examples of our biotech industry that normally we are open for transferring technology to other partners.
Thank you. Here's another question. Has the United States scientific community played any role in the development of the Cuban vaccines? Your colleagues.
No, they don't play a role in the vaccine production, but there are many examples of cooperation between Cuba and US. And we have had a lot of training and conference and congress and workshop that we have done together. For example, my institute, Tropical Medicine Institute in Cuba, Pedro Curie, have had a big relationship with different universities there. We have done PhD, we have done research in many infection diseases, as I can say, dengue virus and AIDS, and in our neuropathic epidemic that occurred in the 90s, we have a big relationship with different state universities and institutes, and we did a lot of research together. But in our Cuban vaccine, not. But in Cuban scientific cooperation, we have had a lot of.
It should be said that because it's the truth, that the US scientific community is very open to cooperate.
To cooperate with
very
us.
open, despite all the difficulties that you can imagine and more than you can imagine. But for example, in the CIM, in the Center of Molecular Immunology, we had an immunotherapy meeting in every 2 years.
Yeah.
So here, scientific meeting. And I should say that the single country sending more scientists to this meeting is the United States. So more than all the European countries and South American countries. So they come even, well, sometimes with difficulty, but they come. And there is a, let's say, a permanent change of viewpoint. So there is by the way, there is an issue of a seminar in oncology. It's a journal. The editor is from Columbia University, by the way, Tito Fo. And maybe you know him, no? And it's a famous oncologist in the US. And there is an issue of the journal last year, I think, that was devoted to cancer research in Cuba, and it was published in the US. So the relationship between the Cuban scientific community and the American scientific community, yes, no, very open, very easy, by the way. No,
And for example,
the communication. No?
I did my PhD there in the state, at Chapel Hill University. This is one example.
Thank you.
Vaccine, but our vaccine, I think that were done by us. But we have had a lot of relationship with the US scientific community.
Thank you. Bernardo Rudy has a question. Is there something inherent in the Cuban vaccines that they can be used on young children, but that is not the same with other vaccines most commonly used, such as the Pfizer vaccine? Pfizer recently released. If I'd like to finish the question. Pfizer recently released information indicating very low efficacy of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine on children 5 to 12. Is this a critical difference in terms of the use of adjuvants?
Yes, I think that there are two important issues regarding the use of our vaccines in children, in younger children, compared with, for example, RNA vaccines. First are related with the safety of the vaccines. Pfizer and Moderna vaccine are very innovative vaccines. I think that are very good vaccines, but are a technology that don't have a huge experience of using human beings. Of course, less in children, inclusive. That means that because the Cuban vaccine are subunit vaccine, the antigen is a protein isolated or produced as recombinant protein in some other cells
Yeah.
are pure protein, are very well characterized, and are the same type of vaccine that we have using in children for many years for preventing infection disease. In the case of Soberana 02, the vaccines looks like Conway vaccines that we are using against Haemophilus influenzae type B and against pneumococcal disease. The Conway vaccines are, they appeared 30 years ago just for solving the problem of the low or the weak immunogenicity of some antigens. Our vaccine designed for become high immunogenic, some antigen in children and even in infants.
Yes, do this.
And we have very good results with this, with the evaluation of Soberana 02 in children.
Yes.
We have very high index of immunogenicity. And when we predict the efficacy of the vaccine in children, we found more than 90% of prediction of the efficacy. In the case of Pfizer, is my opinion. I think that the lack of unimportant adjuvant is important in the case of the children. Another important difference is that from the beginning, we decide to move with a schedule of 3 doses of vaccines.
Very important.
And now Pfizer is trying to solve the problem of the low efficacy in children, adding a 3rd dose. And we, from the beginning, we started with 3 doses schedule. But even in the case of Soberana, we demonstrate that only with 2 doses, we have a higher immune response than 2 doses in adults. And we explain that because justly we are in the kind of vaccine, the design of the molecules is just for activate the better immune response in little children, in younger children. Let's see, we are expecting of what will happen with Pfizer in children. For the moment, they didn't have authorization for children below 5 years old. And they are trying to find a way for supply the evidence of immune response and efficacy in this age group. For the moment, the result of our vaccine in children are excellent, and the best evidence is that our children have not increased the rate of disease during the Omicron wave in Cuba because they were vaccinated. And let's see what happened with Pfizer. I think that all the scientific community is expected with the results of Pfizer in children, mainly in the younger children.
And for example, in Agdala, when it's compared the immunity in youngest adults against the immunity in children, the difference is very, very big. Children respond much better against the antigen than the adult people, young adult people. And I think that there is another important thing that is nice, also, we have done some studies in Cuban people who were abroad and received another vaccines, and then we booster here with our vaccines, and we could demonstrate by neutralization assay, that is the gold standard in virology to detect antibodies, that our vaccine can booster different kind of foreign vaccines, such as Pfizer and AstraZeneca, Johnson, Sinopharm, and the results are very good against Alpha, Beta, and Delta strains, even against Omicron strain.
Thank you.
We are offering our vaccine to you as booster vaccines from Pfizer.
Right. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Cuba program, the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia University, we want to thank the speakers, Dr. Dagmar García, Dr. Sonia Resik, and Dr. Agustín Lage, as well as the commentator, Gail Reed, who has assisted in the organizing of this event. Together with special thanks to the Carlos J. Finlay Vaccine Institute for its generous cooperation. We also wish to thank Ellen Johnson of Columbia University for her support. And for additional information regarding COVID-19 and public health research in Cuba, see the Medic Review Journal, and the website is up on the screen right now, or Gail Reed at medicreview.org, which is also up on the screen. And to the audience, a special thank you for your interest in this topic. And let's hope that we all move towards greater cooperation in general. Thank you all very, very much.
Okay, well, thank you to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
to you. Happy meeting.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes.